we'd have to expropriate it, much like the school board had to do with Scott Park when they changed their mind.
Mr. Farkas?
Chair, you're correct, or they could refuse to sell as well.
Or they could refuse to sell. So, and I do want to say, Madam Chair, to Councillor Murillo, thank you for bringing this up, Councillor Thorne. Mr. Thorne and I were talking about it this morning. We're saying, what is this story about? And it just reflected poorly on everyone. And I knew, because we said, this can't be. This just made no sense to us. So thank you for correcting the record and making sure everyone is aware of it. I'll take the chair back.
Take the chair back. Thank you.
So, Councillor Marula, we need to receive this report. Councillor Jackson? Yeah, it's being approved. Thank you. Thank you very much. So it's being moved by Councillor Marula, seconded by Councillor Jackson. All those in favor? Carried. Carried. Thank you very much. And now we're going back to 7.1. For your patience, Mrs. Zagaric, if you could please address the budget issues.
Through you, Chair, I have just but two slides highlighting the proposed 2015 budget schedule, and building off of some of the content Chris presented this morning. You'll see that the proposed changes to the budget schedule for 2015, which just happens to coincide with an election year, builds off of that coordinated and integrated approach to budgeting. You may recall a few years back there was a C.D. Howe report with respect to municipal budgeting, a number of recommendations. I believe 2 weeks ago Council would have received the consolidated 2014 budget document. That was a change that staff had made as a result of one of those recommendations. And with respect to that consolidated approach, the proposed budget schedule and budget process for 2015 is in keeping with those changes and with respect to a consolidated approach. So you'll see in this slide is for 2015, there are no budgeted GICs scheduled until the month of January 2015, and at that time staff will be providing committee with overviews as it relates to the rate, operating and capital budgets, the tax capital budget, the tax operating, as well as the report as it relates to tax-supported user fees. You may recall in previous years with respect to the rate, the tax capital, and the user fees, we have gone as early as November or December with respect to those budgets and reports in an effort to try to capitalize and realize the full impact on an annualized basis effective January 1st, but staff are recommending that we move forward with a coordinated, integrated approach and that we initiate all of these processes and reports in January and starting in 2015, in January 2015. So again, with respect to the 2015 budget schedule, again, there would be no staff reports until January in 2015, and you'll see that in mid-January 2015, staff would be presenting an overview presentation as it relates to the tax-supported operating budgets, capital budget, the rate budget, as well as the user fee report. Staff would expect that committee may wish to approve the capital budget, the user fees, and the rate budget prior to approving the tax operating budget. That's been the practice in previous years. And again, one of the benefits of doing so, again, is realizing the full impact of the change earlier and realizing a greater benefit over the calendar year rather than deferring it and realizing less of a financial impact. So again, in terms of the budget process and the schedule, you'll see the schedule before you. As it relates to the tax operating budget, again, we are assuming March of 2015. As we've done in previous years, we've approved as late as April in previous years, and there are some restrictions with respect to approval of tax policies. Typically, the latest we would hope to approve the budget would be the middle of April so that we can bring forward the tax policies and the bylaw for the end of April of the fiscal year, calendar year that Council is deliberating on. So again, with respect to the 15 schedule, again, the intention today is just to present to committee the proposed changes to the budget process. And again, this just happens to coincide with an election year, which would have on its own created some challenges with respect to the budget process. But again, going forward, this would become the process beyond 2015, where we would kick off our budget processes in January of the fiscal year, calendar year. Through you,
Mr. Zagaric, succinct as always. Councillor Ferguson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mike, typically we approve the capital budget in December because we get favorable tender results when you tender in January, February, and March while the contractors are filling up their order book through the winter. You mentioned you may want to approve the capital budget earlier. First question is, will staff still be going forward and tendering 50% of the prior year capital budget in December and January to get those favorable results? That's the first question.
Mr. Zagaric.
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, that authority continues going forward. So as it relates to that policy, staff would continue in terms of issuing their tenders. And as the councillor pointed out, there's a threshold, and that threshold is 50% of the previous year's approved.
Okay, so that still continues to
So that would, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, that would continue. But in terms of the presentation of the budget documents, those would be initiated in the middle of January.
Should we not then, to you, Mr. Chairman, lock it down that we're we try to approve the capital budget by the end of January so we can take advantage of these favorable tender results during the winter months? You know, we saw the one in Councillor Whitehead's ward where we tendered in April was $1.5 million over budget for the stormwater system. Should we set the schedule, approve capital budget in January right now?
For you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I believe it's staff's intention that we would try to accelerate the capital and rate budget, whether that is the end of January or early February, just in an effort to provide council and committees with the appropriate amount of time to receive the information. For 2015, the challenge will be, as it relates to the documents themselves, they will be prepared prior to the end of the calendar year. They will be disseminated in January. So recognizing that the materials won't be received until January, the presentations in middle of January, approving the budget at the end of January may be a little optimistic in terms of the timing of presenting that material.
And you don't think it's necessary, in your professional opinion, to get a resolution supporting a deadline to approve capital budget today? We'll just leave it and try to get it done earlier?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, if there are any issues that staff have as it relates to tendering or initiating the capital projects, we would bring that forward as part of the overview of the capital budget in the middle of January.
Okay. And one quick question to Mr. Moore. Gary, when do you typically have all the works that are in a capital budget tendered? Is it done by done by March, or do some still linger on anyway? I know you're doing design now for 2015.
Good morning, Mr. Moore.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Yeah, we do go out as early as October, November of this year for next year, but that's under the pre-approval process for projects that are already identified on this year's budget in coming years. We'll go forward with that type of a process. Anything new that will come on won't be able to go until after we have budget approval.
But when do you typically have your tenders finished?
Oh, we're still tendering now.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Powers.
I think that just builds on my earlier point where I think the layover into the next year, in other words, getting ahead of it, the development of the strat plan and the business plan with that carryover, that 1 year into 2019 is important from the standpoint of knowing what the capital is so the forecasts can get out. We went from 3 year, I mean, Gary and I have had these conversations, and that is, I've always been a believer, is that your business plan should match the term of, the length of term of council. But the fact that you can have that 1 year layover, be ahead of the game, be able to go out for those tenders, early or later in the previous year, so that you can take advantage of not only the suppliers but also the prices, knowing that they'll have the job. So I think what you've got here is obviously I won't be around to be concerned about it, but as a taxpayer I'll be around to be concerned about it. And that, so I think it's the best process that you can in view of reality, but I think you can get ahead of it in view of reality.
You, Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and through you to Mike. Mike, I've found over the years as we've increased the amount of resources that have been allocated to the capital budget process, our staff are under increasing pressure, obviously, to complete those projects. And I've noticed that in certain areas of the organization where we've added additional resources, we've gone multiple years in trying to catch up to the workload that has been assigned to staff. And so it's not uncommon for recreation. For instance, we approved our resources, the capital budget for the Rosedale Pool in 2011 or 12. It was just opened just over a week ago. Green Acres was approved 2 years ago through the budget process. We're losing another season this year. It won't open till next year. I know that our roads department certainly has their own challenges. If it's passed in the budget, all of us are calling and emailing either Gary, Rick, or others about, when's this road or when are the sidewalks going to be complete, and oftentimes they're not done within the same calendar year. And so we're providing resources, and I know your staff have diligently kept track of the completion rates and how many projects have even started, but in many respects, we're not accomplishing the work that's been set out in the calendar year that's been assigned. And certainly there are reasons, good reasons sometimes, why these projects don't get completed. Weather is sometimes an issue. Contamination on a road site delays something. Property issues, I get that. But there are clearly projects that we have allocated resources towards that in some cases haven't even been started in a calendar year. And so how is your staff working with those departments to resolve those problems? Because the expectation certainly from council is we send the letters out, put it through our newsletters. Good news, everyone, we're replacing the 40-year-old pool at this location. Hope to have it up and running next year, next spring, only to find out that they're going to lose another year. I use my Rosedale, Councillor Clark's Green Acres example, and the residents certainly are less than pleased with the news in that regard. And so it is a bit deflating because we do work very hard to try to incorporate some of these projects into the capital budget process. Residents often wait years for a road, a pool, a rec center, a library, and then to find out that the monies have been allocated but not used in a timely fashion can be pretty deflating. So how is your department, and sorry for that long preamble, but I think it warrants an explanation. How is your department helping?
We'll start with Mr. Zagarek.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I believe the issue that Councillor Collins has raised, and I believe it's shared across the horseshoe, is something that staff have picked up in terms of trying to align the budget and the subsequent tax impact with the timing for the investment in the infrastructure. Having said that, there are certain projects that we have tried to cash flow, again, for that purpose of not taxing, for instance, in 2014, if the majority of the investment isn't made until 2015. So what I mean by cash flowing is we may ask Council to approve the design work in 2014 and the subsequent construction expenditure in 2015. In addition, over the last number of years, we've provided additional reporting to the standing committees and to GIC as it relates to WIPs, and recognizing that as it relates to our 2014 budget process, it became clear that through the deliberations and through some of the questions raised by councillors is that staff were not initiating the projects as quickly as we were generating the financing for those projects. So from time to time we report back with respect to our works in progress, our WIPs, and we identify what the completion rate and the spent rate is. And council has from time to time questioned with respect to certain projects, and you may recall during the 2014 capital deliberations there were a number of projects that were either deferred or parked, and that resulted in a 0% capital levy increase for 2014, as council had determined there were sufficient capital projects for staff to work on in 2014. So with respect to the WIPs, staff continue to report to the Standing Committee. As it relates to my department, projects that relate specifically to corporate services are reported to AFNA, but we also engage staff across the various departments with respect to their WIPs. As part of the budget process, I can share with Council that staff do review, corporate services staff, more specifically our capital budget staff, do review each capital project that has been approved to determine what the status of those projects are. In part in an effort to see whether or not the request for further funding in subsequent years is justified given the amount of projects that are still outstanding. So, for instance, if a program area has a sufficient number of open projects, we would ask the question as to whether or not an incremental investment in the upcoming year is justified given that there are some open projects that staff are working on, or can it be deferred for 1 year. So that's part of the role that corporate services has had as part of the budget process. In terms of SMT's direction as it relates to the WIPs, we discussed this at SMT a few weeks back, and the onus is on the directors as it relates to the WIPs. So as part of our annual budget process, we will expect each of the directors in the program areas to review their capital projects and to assess whether or not an incremental ask or request in the 2015 capital budget process is necessary. If, for instance, they have a sufficient number of open capital projects that will tie up resources, we would ask that staff consider deferring the request for 1 year until such time as they've made progress with respect to any open projects.
Councillor Collins.
I'm fully aware of the checks and balances that we have in place. In my mind, they just don't seem to be working in certain areas, and so I'm not certain that the status quo is working. And I know that Mike and his staff, including SMT, have been very proactive in terms of trying to change the situation. But I referenced a couple of projects there. I could probably give you a list as long as my arm across the city, not just in my area, but elsewhere. In terms of, we've provided significant resources, and for whatever reason, either they haven't been started or they haven't been completed in a calendar year, and that's pretty frustrating. And I don't expect them all to be done, but I still think there's room for improvement there. And if there is a subcommittee that's struck, the new council should certainly look at even incorporating into the budget process something in there that talks about whether staff have the ability to accomplish those projects where they've asked for the resources. I mean, in many respects, it's not council's budget when we get those books. At that point in time, it's staff's budget. And then council adopts that information and molds it and tweaks it in certain ways, and then it becomes a corporate budget. But I have found that, in questioning a lot of the staff who have submitted those projects, when you pick up the phone and call them, sometimes it's not guaranteed that those projects are not just going to, that they won't be completed in that calendar year. They may not even be started. And so that's very frustrating, knowing how competitive the budget process is, and knowing, as Councillor Whitehead and others have mentioned earlier today, the infrastructure challenges that we have. So if we allocate something towards an area of the organization, we expect it to be done in a timely way. And I don't really believe that that's occurring in some areas. And so if you're looking for some suggestions or some issues today to take back to SMT and to the directors who are a part of this budget process, I would suggest that that's an area where there is some room for improvement. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Powers, if you can take the chair for a second, please. Just a couple of quick questions. The Ontario pension plan. We know now that the budget is being dealt with, when they're expecting to put it on the books and when we'll have to actually start paying and employees will have to start paying?
So through the chair, my understanding is, and we would confirm this when the budget is tabled, I believe on the 14th, is that those corporations with a defined benefit plan would be exempt from participating in the Ontario pension plan. So we would confirm that when the budget is tabled on the 14th, but again, that was my understanding from the budget that was tabled prior to the fall of the government and the election.
Well, that would be really good news for us. So let's make sure we follow up on that. Departmental impacts on page 2 of 3. We had a report not too long ago, Mr. Chairman, with regards to reserves and how many employees are being paid from the reserves. So the idea in having a sustainable budget is to be living off of the revenue that's coming in, not living off of the reserves. So do we have a handle on whether or not we'll be in that same boat, or whether or not we have to put money into the reserves and not pay out of the reserves our standard operating expenses?
So through the chair, the councillor raises a good point in terms of the purpose for reserves and how reserves can be utilized. And there are some reserves that, given the nature of the project, it may be appropriate to use the reserve for a defined period of time as it relates to some project management fees. But in terms of our reserves overall is at the direction of AFNA, and in fact, it was Councillor Clark who raised the issue around the sustainability of the reserves. Is I believe we have presented 6 reserve policies in 2014, and staff are working towards an additional 4 reserve policies in 2014-15, and we would follow on a similar pattern. And the objective would be to identify the purpose for the reserves, as well as a forecast, a longer-term forecast of that reserve, so that committee has a sense whether or not the forecast and the proposed use and funding transfers in the reserve align to the purpose of the reserve. So, for instance, if the reserve in the forecast is not sustainable, we would raise that to the attention of committee and ask committee to review the draws from the reserve and the transfers to the reserve. So the issue may be, in addition to whether or not the expenditures are sustainable, whether the revenue is sustainable. So for instance, if the transfer is from the operating budget and staff have not put forward and council has not approved an increase in that transfer because we have tried to restrain our tax increase, again, we would identify that as an issue as part of those reserve policies. So again, we have delivered on 6 in 2014, and we are targeting 4 additional reserve policies each and every year.
Thank you, and Mr. Chairman, and that's very helpful, and I'm glad we're going in that direction. The police forensic lab, I didn't see that as a departmental impact. I know they're not our department, but we pay the bill. So do we know whether or not they're planning, maybe the question should be more appropriately referred to the chair of the Police Services Board, but I would like to know what's happening in 2015 in terms of our overall pressure.
Through the chair, with respect to the forensic facility, we've identified it in our capital presentations in previous years as a pressure, but not one that has been defined yet. Council has approved $1.5 million, and Council approved that for the design work of the forensic facility. I don't believe that the board has formally put forward for Council's consideration the balance of the cost of that capital project. It should come forward either as part of their capital presentation or their operating presentation. Council made the amendment in 2014 to approve the police budget as a whole. So you may recall in the spring of this year, Council approved not only the operating budget or the capital budget, but as well, the capital budget for police. So again, my recommendation would be is that Council consider the capital and the operating budgets that are put forward for Council's consideration by Hamilton Police Services as a whole as part of the 2015 budget process. And again, that would, according to our schedule, that would occur in the months of February and be deliberated in the month of March.
Thank you. So, Mr. Chairman, if we could ask Councillor Ferguson the question about the forensic and the forecasted pressure for the police, 3.8% on average over a 5-year period of $5.5 million. So do they know where they're going with their budget?
Councillor Ferguson, are you able to provide some information?
Yeah, the forensic building is something that's a very high priority for the police. You saw that in the story this morning where there's potential for cross-contamination in the forensic areas now with the new technology. The RFP is closed about 3 weeks ago for the architectural services, which, as Mr. Zagarek said, has been approved. We expect that contract to be awarded in the next week or two. Staff have authority from the board to award that contract. Detailed design will commence. Parallel to that, we are working with Mr. Zgaric and his staff to apply to senior levels of government for part of the funding through the Build Canada Fund and any other resources that may become available. And so that's still pending, but I suspect you'll hear a lot more about this when we present the 2015 police budget.
Thank you. And then on the item that Councillor Collins was questioning, the 50% rule that we have for the capital, which is our standard policy for approving next year's capital, do we know whether or not what the total number is now of the capital projects that are in essence sitting in the hopper ready for tender, and whether or not that's the 50% or whether or not it's going to be more than 50%, and can we actually approve anything that's sitting there waiting to be tendered? Can that be done, or do we need to come back with a requisite by council?
So through the chair, my recommendation is we need to come back to council for council approval for this reason. You may recall when I presented the 2014 capital budget, I identified that our forecast 2015, 16, and 17 capital budgets were not fully financed. So given the fact that we haven't a financing plan for 2015, 16, and 17 that aligns to our capital spend is my recommendation is that needs to come back to council for council's deliberations and consideration with respect to our priorities, given that constraint and that pressure in terms of financing.
So, given that, Mr. Chairman, and with reference to what Councillor Collins was speaking about, projects being approved and then they're just sitting there for whatever reason, can we not try to get an actual handle on that? I can tell you, the Minister of Transportation, when they're approving their roads budget, they don't sit there and nothing happens. Once they're approved and they're part of the budget, they have to proceed forward. So it is bothersome to have projects sitting there and languishing as opposed to moving forward. How do we get to a policy that actually states very clearly this is what needs to be prepared and ready to go, here's the criteria before it actually gets onto a capital budget? And I think that might help resolve some of the issues, because if we're putting things on the capital budget and it's not shovel ready, we don't have design work done, whatever the case is, then it's heightened expectation with no chance of success.
So through the chair, in terms of the recommendations, and the comment is, I think that's something that we will take back. And as with respect to staff, what we do ask the program areas to report on as part of our capital budget process is a start date. You may recall in the detail sheet there is a start date. I believe what Councillor Clark is referring to is at senior levels of government, and committee may recall this as part of the stimulus program that both the province and federal government had, was there was some requirement with respect to how ready was that capital project to be initiated. So that is something that we can take back to the program areas. You may recall, committee may recall, as you review the detail sheets, there's a ranking to the detail sheets, and we can ask the program areas to consider the readiness of the capital project as part of that ranking process. So when a committee receives a detail sheet and sees a project with a relatively high ranking relative to another project, that may in part capture the readiness of that project relative to the other project. So that is something that staff can take back as part of our capital budget process and try to incorporate in our guidelines to staff to try to capture that readiness as part of the ranking process. That would be one option.
And if that's the case, there's nothing preventing us from developing a policy to maximize the tendering, as like Councillor Ferguson indicated. You want to be able to get your tenders out before there's a huge mad rush on building across Ontario, which is where the tender prices start to skyrocket. So if you get your tenders out early in the fall, as Mr. Moore, Gary knows, the tender prices historically will be lower than if you're putting them out in July. In July, they're really busy. They say, I can't take the work, so I'll take it, but they'll have to pay a premium. And that's historically what happens. So there has to be a way to get the process front-ended as opposed to back-ended.
Yeah. And through the chair, I think we would want to engage Rick Mail, our Director of Financial Services, around our procurement process. And maybe there is some way through our procurement process to capitalize on those rates, subject to council approval of the capital budget, that those, whether they're favorable in the case of favorable rates, where we could leverage those favorable rates, get council's approval of the capital project, and then move forward with respect to those
I think that would be
investments.
ideal. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll take back the chair. Thank you, Councillor Powers, and Councillor Whitehead.
Okay, Councillor Whitehead, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the forensic, I think it'd be probably in this council's best interest to understand that they're trying to meet a forensic need. We bag and tag, but that's all we do. We send everything to the Forensic Centre of Ontario for the actual science of it. Second piece is that the forensic component of this building is actually a very small component. So I think it'd be probably prudent for this council to get a presentation on this facility and all the other amenities that's going to be built into this facility, so we can understand the price tag before we start approving any further budgets. I think we need to have a clear understanding what the pressures are, what the needs are, and then we can determine for ourselves what we can afford based on our capacity to spend. So I'm going to highlight that. Secondly, Mr. Chair, I heard Councillor Collins, and I'm going to dovetail on that a little bit. Can we build into this budget for far too long? We put newsletters out, websites. When we get the capital books and X, Y, and Z is getting done, and then for 3 years in a row, I had sanatorium in the capital books, advertised it. Now it's not even on the books this year. So obviously, there's some very disheartened individuals on a road that you need a four-wheel drive to drive on. So I'm trying to understand in this process when those decisions are being made, probably for good reasons. I'm not suggesting they're not, so I want to be clear to staff. But there has to be an opportunity, and it's not just happening to me, it's happening to other councillors as well, that we get a report that identifies what was on the capital book the year before, why whatever streets that do not get inputted the following year are no longer there in the rationale for it. So it's not just an internal discussion in our offices, but it's one for public consumption, so that our general public, regardless of what ward it's in, has understanding, or we can fight the fight, and why the street that's been there for 3 years is now no longer even on the books, yet the need hasn't gone away. And could I ask that be implemented somewhere in this process?
So through the Deputy Mayor, that was an observation that staff shared as well in terms of our multi-year budgets, as Councillor Powers identified earlier this morning, is often there's a challenge in terms of our forecasting as it relates to multi-year budgets. With respect to that continuity, I think that Councillor Whitehead is speaking to in terms of the continuity of the projects with respect to our multi-year budget, and then the new budget that is presented each and every year, is we too saw that there were some gaps in terms of that continuity, and for that reason SMT has approved the direction for the 2015 capital budget that in essence we aren't blowing it up and starting from scratch. So we are building off of what was presented for 2015 in the 2014 capital budget. So that is a change in terms of the guidelines and direction from SMT. And the reason for that change is if we are to move to good multi-year budgeting, that puts the onus on staff to really review their capital requirements, not just in the upcoming year, but for instance, in the next 4 years at a very detailed level. So with respect to the 2015 capital budget, what Council in January should expect is to see some continuity with respect to the projects being put forward in 2015 relative to what was presented as part of the 14 capital budget for 2015.
Okay, so help me understand this then. Are we suggesting now, through what you're saying, that if sanatorium, for example, appears on the 2014 sheet, 2013 sheet, 2012 sheet, what happens in 2015? I mean, 2014, sorry, it doesn't show on the sheet. the years previous it did. So what do I expect in 2015?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, with respect to the start of our 2015 capital budget, staff are expected to build off of what was presented in 2014 from 2015. As it relates to requirements with respect to each of the program areas, staff will continue to engage councillors, but in terms of the issue around the continuity and consistency and priorities, capital priorities, moving towards multi-year budgeting, the value of multi-year budgeting is really getting a good sense of what those capital priorities are in the next 4 years. And so we want to build off of that expectation in our 2015 capital budget by building off of what was presented in 2014 in terms of the 2015 forecast. So not to say that it's a given that those projects will be the projects that are approved by council. There will continue to be an opportunity for input from councillors as we develop the capital budget. But again, as Councillor Powers identified earlier today, is there's no value in expending efforts and resources to do a multi-year budget if, in essence, you're approving 1 year and blowing it up each and every year and recreating a new capital budget in the upcoming year. So again, we just want to build off of that expectation of providing a sense with respect to what our capital priorities are. And as Chris spoke to previously in his presentation, is the expectation is that those capital budgets would align to the strat plan and to the city's mission and vision. So again, you would see some alignment.
Like Councillor Whitehead is saying that sanatorium came right out of that capital budget. So can you and Mr. Moore and Councillor Whitehead?
And you're on the right track, but it's not just me. I know that other councillors, Councillor, was it Chipman or whatever? I know Councillor Duval had issues. I know other councillors have projects that showed up in their capital books that were all of a sudden taken out the following year. Now, sometimes if you on request, staff would sit down and explain it to you, but the problem is the people need explaining are the people out there. And I would appreciate that a report comes forward, so whenever there's going to be a change for good reason, or at least it'd be arguably a good reason, then that should be a public document that's brought in front of this council, and that anyone's impacted by an identified capital program in the ward that's been pulled, then that explanation for that pulling of those projects should be done here in the public purview, so that it's not just the ward council getting the benefit of the explanation, but certainly the broader community. That's all I'm asking a commitment to do.
Would you like to make a motion to have that done so that anytime there's a change to the capital budget by staff, there's an addendum as an information item so everyone knows?
I'll work with staff. I don't know why people are shaking their heads. If you like having things pulled,
Councillor Whitehead,
then that's fine.
So let's deal with Mr. Moore and Mr. Zagarek.
I'll work with staff. I think it is prudent, Mr. Chair, that we have that as a public information report. We can have that discussion around the chamber. It's open, it's transparent, and it's educational.
Seems reasonable. Okay, so you can deal with staff and come back with some suggestion at that point. Okay, any other questions for Mr. Zagarek then? Seeing none, I need a motion to receive Mr. Zagarek's report. Moved by Councillor Ferguson, seconded by Councillor Pearson. All those in favor? And I believe we need a motion to actually receive 7.1, which is the full document, which is moved by Councillor Whitehead, seconded by Councillor Collins. All those in favor? Carried. So we're now moving on to 8.1 and 8.2. So 8.1 is an information sheet. We'll need a motion to receive it. And the discussion item is going to be 8.2. So can I suggest then that we have the discussion on 8.2, let's receive 8.1, and we can wrap all the conversation into 8.2. Does that make sense? So moved by Councillor Powers, seconded by Councillor McCaddy. On 8.1, we're receiving it. I was going to suggest we're doing that all in 8.2, okay? So now that's received, and now you can ask questions on 8.1, 8.2. Everything's kind of wrapped into one report, right? Councillor McCaddy's up first, and then Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I'm just thinking of our previous conversations on this. There was, as you know, some discomfort at the amount of money to install the Civic Gateway over at 403 and Highway 6 in that area. the full $230,000. And I was, I guess, maybe just a little bit disappointed at the report here that with the update referred to in 8.1, which we're talking about in 8.2, that doesn't look like there's been a lot of progress on reducing that cost, whether it be in-kind contributions or corporate contributions. So I guess I'd like to know a little bit more about whether there's been any headway that maybe is not captured in the report that the staff could tell us a bit more about. And I think we also heard in the community that it may be a chicken and egg issue, that if we haven't put money forward, the folks in the community are not putting money forward either. So, you know, just a better insight into this. And Mr. Chair, I'm going to have a suggestion different from what's in the staff report later on at the appropriate time once you've had all the comments. If you can come back to me.
I'll put you on the second list.
Yeah. So if I can ask through you to Chris Murray, please, for
Mr. Murray, if you heard the question, so if you could provide some comments to Councillor McCaddy.
Absolutely, Deputy Mayor. You'll recall from the last meeting that I had offered to provide some assistance on this matter, and so my first question to staff was really about what's underneath the $230,000 figure. I just wanted to know how much of that was design, how much of that was materials and labor, and how much of that was, you know, miscellaneous, if you will. And so that's what precipitated the conversation with MTO. And the reason why I wanted all of that information is that Laura Babcock and certainly myself are both in the same situation. Is it's hard to get other parties interested unless they're very clear on what it is that their money is going towards. And so I know Laura has said to me that you know, the amount of money that's been raised so far is maybe not as much as what's possible, and it's not until we're very clear on what the money is going for that we can maybe make the bigger push. And so that's why MTO and staff have met, and what's clear is that the sign can certainly be built within the MTO right away. Accessing it, though, is a bit of a challenge. If we try to do it, access it from the 403 highway, there's a fair bit of traffic management costs that get incurred, and so staff, I think wisely, we're looking for other ways in which we could build the sign in the right location and not have to spend or incur as much cost from a traffic management standpoint on the 403. And so there is a site that we can access from our road. The challenge there, though, is now it's probably a little bit more difficult from a terrain standpoint, and so we haven't really been able to kind of beat down the cost. So again, I don't want to be calling people, soliciting volunteer time or resources towards something that I'm not 100% certain as to what the costs are. And I can tell you what that report says is that, you know, based on everything we know right now, the figure is still in the $230,000 bracket. What I think I would really like to know at this point, and this is where council has to decide whether or not they want to give us the direction, is I think a little bit more work needs to be done on the design, especially given where we want to access the site. Because I know the terrain is difficult. We need to survey it. We need to have a better sense of what it will cost to access the site from the location that we're proposing, as well as be very clear on what specifically the design of the sign will entail. And so rather than incurring a $230,000 cost, there's a lower figure, I think, that there is budget for, and Rob Norman can speak to, that would give us enough detail to know exactly what it is that we're buying. And so that would make it a lot easier, I think, when it comes time for me to talk to, you know, parties in this community that might be willing to assist in reducing the cost, as well as that detailed design. And I know this is a long answer, but that detailed design would give staff a clear understanding of what of that cost we can look after and not have to put out, you know, to the private sector to and pay for. So. That's a long answer to a good question, but at the end of the day, it's awfully difficult to expect people to contribute to something that they're not 100% clear on what the costs entail and where their money or efforts are going to be applied to.
Councillor.
Thanks, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Thanks, Chris. You'd mentioned that Rob Norman had looked at this issue, and it sounds to me like he had a number to perhaps bring forward that would be a detailed design number or something like that, I think I heard, which would give us the information we need. So maybe I'll just ask if you can clarify that. I don't know if is Rob here or... Yeah, there's Rob. Mr. Chair, through you.
Morning.
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Yes, Councillor McCaddy, as Chris was saying, that the work that has been done to date has been very conceptual. We did have the opportunity to meet with MTO on June 25th. As we were initially concerned, the original location would require potential lane closures on Highway 403. There was also the potential that it could affect the ramp coming from Highway 6 onto 403. That was a big question mark and could have added a lot of additional costs to the project from handling the MTO traffic requirements. The new location that we've discussed is closer to Old Guelph Road. The challenge there that we're concerned about is the grade differences going from Old Guelph Road goes under Highway 403, so there's a grade separation. When you come off Old Guelph Road, there's a gully that one must go through for construction access. It's approximately a 10-meter vertical difference. And then the site where the sign would go is somewhere in the range of 50 to 75 meters further north from Old Guelph Road. So those are the issues that we need to deal with. We really need to get into the design. As I say, at this point it's very conceptual. We need to prepare a detailed design so we get a better understanding of how to move forward with a solution.
Councillor McCaddy, please.
Thanks, Mr. Deputy Mayor. So can you just clarify the location? I don't think we have a map here in front of us today, and it sounds like it's moved around a couple times. Along the, Mr. Chair, Mr. Deputy Mayor, as you're on the 403, you're approaching the Highway 6 cutoff. Is the location for the sign, proposed location for the sign, in and around that cutoff, or before you get to the cutoff on the right-hand side of or the north side of the 403? I'm confused now as to where the location is.
Rob, can you drive us to the sign?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. As you're proceeding along the 403, going past 6, you go under 2 underpasses or bridges where the trains cross. It would be between that point or just past it and before you get to Old Guelph Road. So there's a plateau on the side of the highway in an open area before a bit of a forest area that's immediately adjacent to Old Guelph Road. I believe your earlier comment or question related to the consulting or design fees, I should say. There's a number of things we need to look at. There's geotechnical surveying, as the city manager mentioned, archaeology, utilities, and design. We expect that to be in the range of $30,000 to $40,000.
And just one last question for me now, or at this point, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Why was the location that I perhaps not very clearly described, but before the Highway 6 cutoff? Because it seems to me you want to capture folks before they get off Highway 6 and before they get too close to the York Boulevard, the next cutoff. And why was that? Why is that not the location, Mr. Deputy Mayor?
Mr. Dorn.
To Mr. Deputy Mayor, we did talk about other potential options along that the 403 frontage, Councillor. If we went east of Highway 6, we're actually into Burlington, and that's one of the stipulations from the ministry, that it must be within the actual municipality.
Thank you. Councillor Powers.
Move receipt of 8.2.
To be fair, I have other speakers on the list, so I can come back for you that motion, but everyone gets an opportunity to speak to it. Councillor Collins is on the list.
Councillor Powers was reading my mind. I was actually going to move to receive it, and if there was direction on this one, in light of the lack of private sector support, and I'm certain, as we all know, I assume that everyone's receiving the same kind of calls and emails that I'm receiving. The only calls and emails that I've received since this project became public and the price tag became public was that most people in the community are opposed to investing this amount of resources into the project. It's not too late to fold the lawn chairs on it, so I was quite willing to move to receive the report today and refer this to future budget processes. If there's private sector support at a future date, we can certainly resurrect it. If there are opportunities to reduce the budget to less than what's been presented here today, we can certainly resurrect it, or future councils can. But at this point in time, it's certainly not financially feasible. So I would certainly support what Councillor Powers has suggested.
I'll come back to you also. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was on holidays last week, and I drove up to Elliott Lake. I counted 12 gateway signs in different communities. Sudbury's got a brand new, beautiful gateway sign entering into Sudbury off of Highway 69. So clearly other communities are making the investments because they believe that a gateway sign is very important, and it creates a sense of pride, and it identifies, clearly identifies the community. We're one of the exceptions to the rule, so I'm not clear if we're better than all those other communities that saw it as an important investment to make. I would hope not. That's not the case. So I'm certainly supportive of us receiving this report, because it's not actually asking for as an information report and allowing the staff to continue to do their due diligence. That's my position. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Pearson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. And I'm a little disappointed. I think we should have gone forward with this, but I support if it means just tabling it for now and we come back at a future budget process and look at something. I think it is important that we identify and we put a marker out that we are Hamilton. We're proud to be Hamilton. I think we've said in the past, Stony Creek has signage. We put Stony Creek signage up in the mid-90s and we're very proud of it. Just as Councillor Whitehead said, I just came through from Barrie on the way back yesterday from taking our daughter back to university. That actually we drove through 89, coming all through Fergus and Guelph, and you see all the little communities that they take pride in their communities and have signage. So I don't think we should lose sight of this. But I did want to ask a question to staff. I did notice coming along the 403 there that there is a new sign up that identifies direction to Tim Hortons Field. Who paid for that sign? Are staff aware of that?
Hortons Wood under TOD. Murray, do you know?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we can confirm this. I'm just thinking back to my Red Hill days and all the signage along the roadway. I think that what fell within the MTO right-of-way was their cost in terms of wayfinding or directional signs. So anything above and beyond that, I could see how the province would basically push it towards us to pay for. Whether it be like a TICAT sign that is, identifying in the east end of Hamilton, away to the stadium, that would be on, I think, the TICAT's nickel. This kind of sign that we're talking about here that displays Hamilton prominently would be our cost. That's pretty clear from the MTO conversation. So, but those other signs that you're referring to, I believe they are their nickel.
Thank you, and I just want to clarify that because it's a brand new sign. It wasn't there a few weeks ago when we came back through that route. But certainly, as Deputy Mayor, I don't want to lose sight of this, and I think that through staff's review and ongoing sort of deliberation on what actually can be put in place, it doesn't have to be maybe as grandiose as has been projected to begin with, and that we don't lose sight of this. Thank you.
Councillor Farr, please.
Yeah, I would not want to lose sight either, contemplating the original intent and when this motion was originally brought forward, and appreciating all the work that staff has done to date. And I'm wondering through you, Mr. Chair, to the appropriate staff, if we may be able to, as we continue to keep this alive for now, and perhaps now the timing will not work as it relates to the 403, and having at least one sign down on a major thoroughfare prior to the inception of the 2015 Pan Am Games. I'm wondering if the appropriate staff may be able to have a look at some of our comparator cities, hundreds of examples obviously along major highways where these gateway signs do exist, where pride in those communities is evident for the thousands and thousands that drive either through or are set to explore those cities. I'm wondering if we could maybe get comparator prices on what the costs were in places like London and others that have these gateways, and maybe compare that 230 figure that we've continued to stare at today and have for some months now with some of those costs. So through you to the appropriate staff, maybe just as direction, I don't think a motion is required.
Mr. Norm, he's asking you to do some shopping with other municipalities to see what their costs were. I would point out that the gateway sign at Battlefield Park was $300,000, and that's the same size as the one on the highway. So I'm not sure. We'd leave it to you, but yeah, I think you're going to find they're all up in that price range, except for the ones that are just the wooden flat sign. I saw one in Chatham, Kent. So it's up to you. You can make the motion for your staff to explore that option.
Direction is fine. If Mr. Norman could just comment.
For you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, yes, staff have had some discussions. We don't have specific costs. We've looked at different methodologies. The Deputy Mayor is quite correct that the Battlefield Park sign that we did in that park was, I believe, $290,000, so almost $300,000. I'd just like to also note in that particular case there was no issues of access. We were accessing off the street in a city-owned park. Many times the municipal gateways are located in highway interchanges, which makes access easier. In this particular case, in all the options that we've reviewed with the MTO, access has been the challenge. And again, even with this option that we're discussing off Old Guelph Road, as the city manager mentioned, the terrain, it's a challenge. It's a 10-meter vertical distance or drop that you have to manipulate a gully, and then there's a fair horizontal distance as well to get to a plateau.
Yeah, thanks. So just an illustration perhaps of 6, 7 gateway signs, notwithstanding a great-looking gateway in Stony Creek. And maybe the cost from those communities for those particular gateway signs would be great. I'll move it if need be.
Staff, do you need direction sufficient? Councillor Powers, if you want to take the chair. Thank you very much. Not sure exactly where we're going now. So looking at the value of signs in other communities, it really depends on what you want to pay for. And Niagara Gateway, when they put that in some 12 years ago, it was close to $500,000. So it depends on what you want to do. My challenge, and I've said it from day one, is the Ministry of Transportation are the ones that have all the regulations. So you have to start with them. And I'm glad we had that conversation finally, because it enlightened a lot of our staff and probably a lot of the public that the regulations with the ministry are significant. They don't want vehicles stopped on the side of the road. If you're going to do that, you have to close a laneway. You have to follow all of the rules in terms of the safety protocols that are in place for the workers. So it is a significant undertaking no matter what. I would point out that the $290,000 in the Stony Creek Gateway sign doesn't have electricity. So there's no lights on it. It's on a corner that's well lit, so we went cheap and didn't put in the electrical to light up the sign, although we would love to have that now, and we're actually looking at flags for that particular corner, but it's not inexpensive. Site access, do we have any idea what the costs are coming in from the back way off Old Guelph Road? Still haven't had that coffee, but that's okay.
Through you, Mr. Chair, what we've allowed for in the budget at this point is $105,000 for the access. It's not only construction access, but it's also to provide a long-term maintenance access road as well.
Okay, so we're building a roadway in. But the 230,000 before then had I still don't know exactly what we're getting for $230,000 because $105,000 road in means that we're building a $130,000 sign, which is not a fancy sign. So we still, with the greatest respect to staff, and I understand they've been dealing with the costs, we still don't have an accurate depiction in terms of the actual costs to build this, put the utilities in, and do what we're supposed to be doing on a terrain that is Martian, if anything.
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, it is a preliminary estimate at this point. It's in talking with the engineering design staff, engineering construction staff, speaking with MTO, other designers within the city, as well as some consultants. This is our preliminary estimate. To get a better understanding of the costs, we really need to get into undertaking surveying of the site and developing detailed design solutions.
So we don't have a low end or a high end, we just have a rough guess and we don't know. To be clear, because this is going to be reported as we can do this for $230,000 at this location, and that's not accurate. It's not accurate. We have to build a road, and the $100,000 you're talking about would mean that you're going to have a sign that's worth much less than that. So we're going to be close to what Chatham-Kent has with this giant placard of plywood, as opposed to what we have in Stony Creek. So we don't have real costs here because of the location. Mr. Murray?
If I can, through you, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why before we start crowdfunding and we start asking other, corporate partners in this community for money, we need to be very specific in what we're asking. So that's why I think Rob is mentioning the detailed design at a cost of between $30,000 and $40,000 to nail down what specifically the cost of the product is, not just accessing it, but also the actual sign itself. The materials, the fixtures that you need to put it in place properly, to light it, to do all of that. I mean, if I were going to commit resources to anything and someone was asking me, I'd want to know what I'm getting for my money. And so I think that's been the challenge that Laura Babcock is facing, and it's the same challenge that I'm facing if I was to ask anyone for some support. So we would need to do the detailed design regardless.
Not to mention the fact that people expect taxpayers to pay for it as opposed to the private sector, but that's a philosophical issue. So to my colleagues around the table, I'm still back where I was in the very beginning. It's not one sign, it's 4 signs. So if we want to do this, then we should be following our normal process. We had an initial report on 4 locations. We should be reaching out to the province and looking at 4 locations, finding out what their costs are, what their permit fees are, whether or not we would have an agreed upon location. With the Niagara Gateway, it took over 1.5 years to come to that conclusion on that sign with the ministry when I was there. It's a long, drawn-out process. And it's not that the ministry is objecting to the signs. They want to work with you, but they want to make sure that everyone is going to be safe where they're putting the sign, and they have regulations in place in terms of the distance from the highway. So if we're to proceed with this, we should be doing it systemically and systematically right across the, here's the 4 locations, talk to the ministry. Are these locations okay? If not, what locations would they prefer? Come back with that report and get some analysis done before you move forward. And you'll find a better and more actual and truthful cost analysis if you follow that process. I was always concerned from the beginning that we were flying quickly by the seat of our pants, and I can tell you that all of those other municipalities that have these signs, they didn't do it that way. They followed a program, followed the process, and it took many, many months of work, sometimes years, to get to where they wanted to be. So I appreciate the desire from some in the community to get it done quickly, I'm not sure we can. The last point, I do believe they've got signs on our signs now, indicating that we're hosting the Pan Am Soccer. I noticed that coming in from Winona, I think it was, in Grimsby. So I believe that's already been taken care of. And I noticed the brackets on the overpasses are being installed by the ministry for the larger banners, which will be the Toronto Pan Am banners. So they'll be going up, I suspect, shortly also. So there will be lots of signage. And with that, I'll take the chair back.
Sir, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I have Councillor Duval as a first-time speaker, Councillor Pearson, second-time speaker, and put me down when I'd like to speak to my motion very briefly.
Okay, so Councillor Duval, you're going to be your first time. I have second time Councillor McCaddy, Powers, Collins, and Pearson. Councillor Duval.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for some of the comments that you made, and it just made me wonder, and maybe I can ask through you to Mr. Murray. When I'm looking on page 2 of the cost, I'm really worried now. What I'm reading here is at $230,000. The sign fabricating is $40,000, and the rest is for greeting, having it around there, doing the foundation. So is that what I'm reading here? The actual sign is only $40,000?
Mr. Murray?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, that's the estimate staff has come up with, yes.
So when Councillor Clark has indicated earlier, he had just said, and he still prefers going with maybe all 4 or 5. We're basically, if we went by these numbers, we would be paying over $1 million for $160,000 worth of signs. Is that what I'm understanding?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, the only thing I would caution you on is the $105,000 is the estimate, again, without surveying, without any detail. It's the estimate for accessing the one particular site off of 403. In terms of the other 3, I don't know if the access is easier or more difficult. I don't know. So it could be the same amount, it could be less, it could be more. But I think to the comments that were made earlier, there is a process that we typically follow to get down to the specifics of the costs. We start with a concept, and eventually we get to a detailed design that gives us exactly the information we need in order to put a price on something that is accurate. So, but your read of this chart, this table on page 2 of 2 is correct. But I just would caution you about assuming that the 105,000 would be attributable to the other 3 locations.
Okay, so you threw me, Mr. Chair, and just the other one on the contingency, $30,000 for a $40,000 sign.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, again, that's in the order of about just over 10%. So. Of the overall. So, that's, given the level of detail that we have, you err on the conservative side. As you get more and more detail, you're able to kind of fine-tune the contingency. So, but given what we know right now, that's probably not an unreasonable number to be putting down.
Okay, so, and I thank you for that. And so, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure where we're going with this. If we're going to have some more information back, that'd be appreciated. But now I'm starting to get second thoughts of $40,000 for, but $200,000 is going to be to relocate, just to locate it, and then 4 other signs. I don't see where we're going to get some value out of $160,000 worth of product for $1 million. So I'll listen to my other colleagues, but if not, then either we look at it for the next budget process, or just send it back for more definite numbers before we make a final decision. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Johnson, please, first-time speaker.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I also have, since day one, actually, I've had some trepidation over this amount of money. And now I'm hearing that we're not even going to approach the corporations because we're not even sure about the money, and a good corporation is not going to put money towards something that's conceptual and has no bottom line. So I think that should be our key right there, to listen to that part. The other part that I like, and I'm going to dovetail on the Deputy Mayor's comments, we need to look at this holistically. We need to look at the branding. We need to do this properly and not do these one-offs and say, okay, but we've got 3 more to come from, and then all of a sudden a nice plan comes in for the remaining 3, and this one becomes the enigma, if you will. So I would really like to see, as the Deputy Mayor suggested, is that we just send this whole thing back, take a look at it holistically, and bring it back properly in a proper plan, if you will, and let's just stop doing this one-off thing, and let's just look at it all together, and including the branding. So if there's no other motions coming forward, I certainly would like to put that at the appropriate time, please.
Thank you. Any other first-time speakers? Councillor McCaddy, you're up second time.
Thanks, Mr. Deputy Mayor. So to me, I guess the concern is that this does not seem to have advanced any significant distance between the 3 or 4 different times we've had it. At least it feels like 3 or 4 different times, and maybe less than that. But I still have lots of questions about the location of the sign. I think it probably needs to go before Highway 6, and if that's in Burlington, we need to have that discussion. I can't imagine why Burlington would care. It's right on the edge of their municipality and the edge of our municipality, and we've got a good relationship with them. We need to capture folks before they get off Highway 6. There's still a lot of logistical questions, which it sounds like I was thinking we should have worked those out, but from your comments and your experience provincially, it sounds like that's just the way it is. This kind of thing does tend to be complex. So I don't want this to die at this point in time. I want us to continue to think about this, although it seems that the timing is such that we're not going to see this in the very short term. We're nearing the end of this term of council, and I know there are other Pan Am signs, as you indicated, Mr. Chair, that are starting to come up in other ways. So it's not like we're not going to have any indication ways to celebrate Pan Am, and for folks who come to our city, we're going to be welcome when they come here. So I'm in a bit of a loss, actually, how to deal with this at this point in time. I don't see enough information here in between the time when we talked about this last and before us today that gives us enough information to make a definitive decision, a definitive commitment. I was going to suggest, how about a commitment of $115,000, 50% of the cost, and ask for folks to go out and try and get partners on that basis. But it still seems like there's enough questions that we wouldn't be able to get to that point in time. So I guess I would be willing to support a tabling motion, or perhaps even a Councillor Powers motion to accept this report today, and understanding that we need to continue to work on it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Powers.
Thank you. And I know we're not speaking by motion, but just it's a matter of more intent. Is the fact is I think the clock has run out. I mean, the intentions of fast tracking this singular location was to capture the people coming from Toronto as they enter the city in anticipation for the Pan Am Games in next year. I am aware that there are parallel processes that are undergoing that's been raised with regards to identifiers or signs. I think we need to beef up those efforts, perhaps, in maximizing the exposure. The fact that we're adding, the add-ons to the signs that say, home to the 2015 Pan Am Games is really, really great, along with those particular things. But my suggestion in receiving this is, the clock's run out. Let's not move on this right now. In the case of urgency, let's go back. There may be other options in order to do them. I know some of the planters that have been put in some of the former municipalities that welcome you to the downtown areas or things like that have come in substantially cost. I think what we're doing is rushing in order to achieve something for a finite date. And as all the councillors suggested, go back and look at other alternatives that may be equally as good. I can't recall off the top of my head, if you pass by Highway 6 and coming to the train bridge, whether there's a concrete abutment that runs up the side that spans the bridge. If there is, then, painting doing a painting on the concrete thing may be alternatives in order to do those brick things. I think our fixation was on a standalone, identified, singular location, whereas I think there's more other options that with time and with the ultimate achievement that you suggested, Councillor, is that we do have 4 major gateways to this city. If we're going to do it right, but at the right price. So my motion stands when you finally get to it.
Yep. Thank you. Councillor Collins?
Yes, and I believe if the motion is to receive, then I would move to refer the item to future budget process.
Okay, so we'll deal with 2 motions in a second. Councillor Pearson first, and then I'll come to you, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. And Councillor Powers took the words right out of my mouth, and I just scooted over to ask Mr. Norman. Coming through yesterday, as I said, there are concrete abutments, obviously the rail bridge, but there's also a retaining wall as you come along the highway there, just before the exit of York Road. And I was going to ask through you that maybe staff can look at whether the ministry would entertain some sort of painting or decal affixed to that retaining wall that identifies, similar to our signage now, that could be temporary, something that we could just have in time, but at least there's options to look at that identifies you're coming into Hamilton. So I'd like to ask them, I've already spoken to Mr. Mormon, just as Councillor Powers had raised, but I think that at least it puts us on the map. And I know I've raised this in the past with regards to the Red Hill Bridge as well, whether there was some sort of deckling that could be put under it that identifies Hamilton. The bridge over the Red Hill Creek. So I know that I've raised that in the past. So that may be an option that might simplify this and give us something that may be temporary and lead us towards something more permanent in the future. Thank you.
Norm.
Through Mr. Deputy Mayor, we did not ask that specific question when we met with MTO. We did go over a number of options, but discussing the existing concrete retaining wall was not one. We'd be happy to ask that question if that's the direction.
Councillor Pearson?
Mr. Deputy Mayor, I'd put that as direction in staff going forward and doing the background, continuing the investigation on this.
Okay. Councillor Whitehead?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I think there's some good dialogue going around this table. Comprehensive, ad hoc versus comprehensive. My concern, there's a theme that's been running through some of those comments, is that we do not have a clear picture of what the primary option is. We do not have, so if you don't have that, then you don't have a cost. So before getting into a budget process, before that work is done, would be premature. So I can't support sending to a budget process till that other due diligence is concluded. And if it is done before the budget process, fine. If it's not, then back to I think it was the Deputy Mayor's comments, Councillor Parr's comments. Let's do it right the first time and make sure that we explore every opportunity, every option, cost it out clearly before we start debating it at budget.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Partridge, please. First time speaker.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. And I was just going to ask what the motion would be that's in front of us, because I have to agree with the previous speaker. If we don't have any hard costs, how can we refer this to a future budget process? So if that's what was going to happen in this motion, then I would not support that. So I just wanted to be very clear when the time comes that you address that, sir, that I get some clarity. Thank you.
Absolutely. Councillor Powers, you have a motion to receive item 8.2. Seconded by Councillor Collins. All those in favor?
Carried.
Any opposed? The item is received. Councillor Collins, you spoke of a budget.
Yes, I would move that this be referred to the next budget process, and that certainly all the additional information that's been requested today, whether it's the location issues, whether it's the true cost of this project, all those associated issues and the information attached to them be presented as part of that information report.
Okay, so Councillor Powers, you're seconding it, and Councillor Partridge, you wish to speak?
I wasn't keeping track, but I'm assuming staff was.
They were nodding their heads a lot, so yes, I believe they were. Councillor Partridge.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. But just to be clear, we're still talking about the $230,000 being referred to the budget process. even with all of the discussions, around the table, we don't have any costs attached to that. So could I just have some clarity on what exactly are we looking at pushing to the budget process, please?
Councillor Collins, if you would like to clarify what you would...
It would be the project in general, in whatever shape or form it takes. We would have all the information in front of us. It may actually be, based on your comments and others, maybe something different than 2 plus. It may be something higher than that. And I think council needs to understand exactly what the true costs are before making a decision on it.
And is it just the one sign, or are you looking at, staff looking at the citywide issue? Just the one sign?
Well, I certainly don't control, and none of us control what comes forward. If they believe that the other projects need to come forward at that point in time, it certainly can be discussed.
Then we make the decision.
I can tell you what my opinion is on it, but if you're asking me what staff are going to bring forward, I leave it to them to determine what's on the agenda during the budget process.
Councillor Partridge?
Yes, thank you. So I appreciate the clarification, but what I am hearing is that we are still going to be dealing with that $230,000. Could be a little bit less, could be a little bit more.
No, it would be the actual true design cost for the sign at the location that the MTO has agreed to.
So would that be part of the budget process, though, or would that just be for the next term of council to entertain?
It would come
GIC?
For the next council to entertain and be a part of the budget process. So it would be an information report detailing the design work, what the actual cost would be for the maintenance road, and what it would look like, and here's your budget cost. What do you want to do?
Okay, so I appreciate that, but I will still be opposed to it, as I have been all along. I just do not think that we can afford $1 million plus or minus for 4 signs. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other? Councillor Powers.
The last one is the options. I think it's Orangeville has 3 different signs.
Yes, they do.
From 3 different approaches, and what they do is they take into consideration the terrain and the opportunities. It still says welcome to Orangeville, but it reflects, if you want to call it, the topography or the approach and the proper siting. So it doesn't rule us having to have a cookie cutter solution at each one of the 4 locations.
And based on our terrain, I think that would be what you'd end up with. Councillor Whitehead.
Just information, all those communities I drove through, they had 1. They didn't have 4, they didn't have 5, and that's including Sudbury. So they elected to go to 1 on the main driver into the community, or the one that they thought was strategic.
Thank you, except for Chatham-Kent, which had many. So the motion is before us. All those in favor? All those opposed? Councillor Partridge is recorded as opposed. Anyone else recorded as opposed? Can I just ask a quick question? Are we getting a report back on banners for Pan Am soccer coming into the city and all of those types of accoutrements?
Through the chair, absolutely. I think what we're looking at, and I think it dovetails a little bit on what both Councillors Powers and Johnson said, is we're looking at it far more holistically. We're looking at what's going on with Pan Am and the monikers and the additions that we need to make to the current signage. We are having conversations with MTO as well as Toronto 2015. I can also mention that I've had some conversations with Dave Zimmer as probably I think as early as about 2 weeks ago, looking at just wayfinding signage relative to the stadium, relative to the Pan Am games, and relative to how we expand that broader than just the downtown CIP area where he's starting to do some of his work, and actually expand it across the city. So it takes into account branding, it takes into account a lot of the things that have been mentioned so far.
And the last question is, do you need design costs, or how are you going to budget for the work on the report back? I had a moment of deja vu. I really need a coffee, honestly, Brian. Regardless of the recording playback, and I see that some councillors are taking us on the opportunity to audibly record the council meetings, which is very nice. The question remains the budgeting for the design and the maintenance road work. You have to figure out what those costs are going to be, I'm assuming, and where's that money coming from?
So, and again, through you, Deputy Mayor, There is monies that is Rob Norman has identified available. I think some $32,000. Is it, Rob? $36,000 that we'd be accessing in order to generate the information you need to make an informed decision next term of council. So we're going to be using that money to give you the detail you want, which will give you the accurate figures.
Okay, so I know there's going to be a cost incurred, so we want to make sure the money's there. Okay, thank you very much. 8.2 is done. We're now moving on to 8.3. Councillor Powers is recommending a moving of the, seconded by Councillor Jackson. All those in favor? Any opposed? The item is carried. Item 8.4 is now before us. This is the employee-related costs from capital budget. Move it. Moved by Councillor Powers, seconded by Councillor Jackson. Any comments or questions? All those in favor? Any opposed? Item is carried. We're now moving on to item 8.5. Councillor Jackson, please.
So, Mr. Deputy Mayor, if I can get a seconder, on page 3 of the report, you'll see where there's a motion written by staff, Rick Mail, purchasing manager, to rescind what was approved by council 7 years ago. Just quickly, if I can get a seconder for that, please. Councillor Collins will second that. Mr. Deputy Mayor, just quickly, Council gave me in 06 the authority to try to save a volunteer group known as the Firefighters Drum and Bugle Corps at their banquet hall, monies that they owed the City of Hamilton. Council authorized me to see if I could work on an arrangement to save the volunteer group. Brought an arrangement forward with Local 288, the Firefighters Union. We worked on a 7-year journey with staff, all appropriate staff involved, all agreements in place, and at the last minute, and for whatever justified reasons, I respect the Local 288 decided the project, they just couldn't continue on with the agreement for the project, so they've abandoned the project, Mr. Deputy Mayor. So I need to formally have committee and council rescind what you authorized me to do. However, still to save the volunteer group, the Firefighters Drum and Bugle Corps, to get taxpayer money back. There are other arrangements potentially out there, and I will hope to keep this body posted as soon as possible. I just need a little more time. Thank you for allowing me that, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. Councillor Jackson, if you could first move a motion to lift the item because we had tabled it in the past meeting.
I will move that, seconded by Councillor Collins.
All those in favor of lifting the item?
Oh, Carolyn.
Adam Glick.
Through the
I need to move rescinding today.
Yep, you're correct. I had it written down in the wrong section. That's my fault. Councillor Jackson, your original motion stands to rescind.
Thank you.
Seconded by Councillor Collins.
No.
At council, the
Okay. So, Mr. Deputy Mayor, my apologies, Carolyn. Working closely with staff, as you can see on page 3, their recommendation was that at some point in time it had to be rescinded, and because it was part of the GIC report today, I inadvertently thought I had to move the rescinding today, but I'm happy to do that at council on July 11th instead, and I've spoken to each member of council or advised them by email to apprise them ahead of time. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
So your motion is to receive then?
To receive at this time, and I'll do the rescinding next week.
Excellent.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Thanks, Carolyn.
All those in favor? Any opposed? Item is carried. On item 8.6, we need a motion to lift that item before we deal with it. Correct, Madam? No?
No, through the chair, item 8.6 has a in-camera component, which is item 12.4, I believe. So the committee may wish to defer discussion on the public report until it has discussion of the in-camera report.
Move to defer. Councillor Collins is moving to defer, so we go in camera on 8.6. Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Partridge. All those in favor? Thank you. Item 8.7, Advisory Committee for Persons with Disabilities. Okay, there's 2 recommendations. Item 1, you wish to move item 1, Councillor Collins? Seconded by Councillor Marula. Any comments or questions? All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Any opposed? The item is carried. On item number 2. Councillor McCaddy is moving item number 2. Seconded by Councillor Jackson. Any comments, questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? The item is carried. Do we need to receive the report also? No? Thank you. Moving on to item 8.8. Councillor Farr, please. Task Force on Cleanliness and Security.
Yes, thank you. This is a very productive task force made up of citizens, BIA executive directors, both downtown and International Village, Councillor Collins and myself. And when we meet, which is on average once every couple of months, I would suggest, we have great discussion and we're assisted by all appropriate staff, particularly municipal law enforcement, public works, and Hamilton Police Services. At our last meeting, we had a delegation by Irene Hubar, who manages for Aragon Properties, the Wright House and the property to the west. Some of what was said in that delegation had spawned a recent CBC article by Samantha Craig and subsequent media reports. In fact, in the last few days, a couple of occasions on ML and other press have had some interest, The Spectator and others, in the three-part motion that is before us as an agenda item for 8.8 today and as minutes for this last task force. So I thought it would be imperative here publicly, Mr. Chairman, to make clear and for the record what the intentions of the task force are and what the expectations are a week from today right here in council chambers, where we will hold a public meeting that will see follow-up with respect to a municipal law enforcement, Hamilton Police Services potential partnership in dealing with some nuisance complaints in this area of our core. What our delegate Irene Hubar was speaking to specifically, some of it was quite disturbing. Regular witness to her and her security guard Randy. She alleged drug activity. There was one recorded assault and alleged two other assaults. Public urination, disturbing issues as it relates to the area in and around the Wright House. And I thought accordingly the task force moved this three-part motion as a means to address the issue, and asked in this motion for municipal law enforcement as well as Hamilton Police Services to report back on the feasibility of making an effort to enforce accordingly existing bylaws. We do reference in C, and there's been some confusion publicly that we report, include in the report information regarding a similar project that is in place in the city of Barrie. There are elements of Barrie's bylaw that they instituted some years ago, I think 4 or 5 years ago, as I recollect from previous task force meetings, that we could look at, but there are also others, for example, busking. I can't tell you how many responses to residents who enjoy the vitality of busking in our core, as I do, who were concerned having a look at what Samantha had laid out in the CBC in Barrie, which included no busking in their downtown core. Well, as you know, this council, this term of council, we actually address busking independently and welcome busking in our core, and we know it adds to the vitality. It doesn't fit here, but there was a little bit of confusion. So I wanted to be certain that we just narrow it down here publicly today. For one, a public meeting next Monday right here in council chambers, where we will look forward to delegations with the Safety and Security Task Force, any side of this issue you wish to speak to, and an understanding that what we had asked as a task force to staff is that MLE and HPS report back on examining on how to better enforce bylaws, so existing bylaws, dealing with nuisance complaints, in particular the ones that are of concern and that I have mentioned here on the record here today in our downtown core, and particularly in and around the Wright House. I did have a good chat with the chairman of the Police Services Board just prior to our General Issues Committee today. I appreciate that he pointed out B of this three-part motion from the agenda of our last task force, that staff include in the report the possibility of having a full-time municipal law enforcement officer and a full-time Hamilton Police Services officer to participate in a pilot project. And fair enough, it could have been interpreted that we were looking for a new hire in both departments. It doesn't necessarily have to be that, and we'll see on Monday what's recommended when the appropriate staff from both MLE and HPS deliver their report back to the Downtown Cleanliness and Security Task Force. And again, we welcome all members of the public who wish to be present. And I want to make it very clear that there are some sensitivities, and completely understandable, as it relates to human rights and folks' rights to gather on sidewalks and so forth. And it was at our last task force that we directed staff and our clerk Lori to be certain to invite some members of social planning agencies. It could be Tom Cooper from the Poverty Roundtable. Someone will be a delegate. We don't know who yet. Paul Johnson is actually working closely with us on this to speak to some of the areas which really have no relevance, but we want to be certain that the task force understands and is definitive in our direction here, that we are solely looking at the behaviors, as I mentioned, the public urination, if there's drug deals going on and other nefarious activities that aren't appropriate, and we have bylaws in which to enforce. But however, as we've heard up until now, the resources aren't there to enforce them on a regular.
Did I hear correctly, you haven't had the public meeting?
We will be having the follow-up public meeting that addresses what's before us today.
Yes.
In the last task force agenda, staff from MLE and HPS will be reporting back. But we're looking at some criminal behavior to be enforced more regularly.
So this report that's here has nothing to do with the public meeting then? This recommendation stands, is that what you're saying?
Well, what we are as a GIC, this is item 1, so we would look for, I would believe, Carolyn, approval of the motion set forth from our last task force. That's what's before us here today. So item 1 would require GIC approval and ultimately council ratification. That's separate from the public
meeting that you're talking about.
And to note that if it's, yes, I should note, thank you, Chair, that if approved here today, we will have on Monday at our July 14th task force on cleanliness and security in the downtown, folks from both the MLE and HPS reporting back on the feasibility of this pilot to address the serious concerns that were raised by the property managers at the Wright House.
Thank you. Councillor Partridge, and then I'm going to come to Councillor Ferguson.
All right, thank you, Deputy Mayor. And I just want to say that one of my Carlisle residents actually owns a business that is located in that building, and you know, employees and her clients have had to deal with some very bad behavior, as Councillor Farr has laid out. So I just want to say that I appreciate very much the work that you've done on this, bringing it forward through the task force, and you know, I really support it 100%, because there are few companies left in that building, and my resident certainly likes the location and wants to support the property owner and stay within that building, but has actually reached the point where her employees and her clients are being so affected, let's say, by the activity on the street, that she had actually reached the point she was going to consider whether or not she could actually stay in that location. So it's an urgent situation and it needs to be dealt with. And I just want to say thank you very much to the councillor colleague across the way for bringing it forward.
Councillor Ferguson.
Yes, I fully support the resolution, the recommendations going forward, but as I talk to Councillor Farr about this morning, it troubles me a touch that the solution is to hire another police officer and another full-time municipal law enforcement. That's exactly why we have action team, and so it's critical first to make sure that you communicate either with the crimes officer or with the superintendent in charge of action, point out this hot spot so they can focus there. That's what they do. They move that group around to where they're needed. And so before I'll let the motion go because it says that the possibility of, but if they could first just formally inform the police, verbally through the crimes officer, that this is an area we need action to focus on, that might be helpful to solve the problem. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Partridge, can you take the chair, please?
Yes, I will, sir.
Some quick questions to Councillor Farr. I've been following the emails for the last few months. The police were not contacted, or I'm assuming the crime manager is aware of it, and what have the police been doing?
Councillor Farr?
It's a good question, and action and mounted, and we even have a beat officer in that area of King and James North. We're doing an extraordinary job. Crime is down in the downtown core, there's no question. What the discussion revolved around at our last task force was, can we can we allocate a full-time officer to this specific situation? And how they do that, we'll find out on Monday. They'll report back on the feasibility of that. So that's what this is, a feasibility motion. And to the chairman's point, I don't recall in the debate any new hire debate going on, but it may indeed be some reallocation of existing enforcement staff, MLE and or HPS.
Councillor Clark?
So, Madam Chair, have you had a discussion with the police chief then, or the superintendent?
Councillor Farr?
Scott Raston is I believe, is he a superintendent? Inspector Scott Raston has been the point person on this committee for the last term.
Councillor Clark?
And they did indicate resources are an issue, which is part of the reason why what's before us is before us. They can't always be there, so always being there is what we're requesting them to look into.
And so what happens when they move from that location to 2 blocks down and the police officers at that location?
Councillor Farr?
I will let the professionals answer that one on Monday, and I'm certain that will be a topic. It's a good question.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Clark?
And has there been a discussion in general about dealing with some of the issues in the downtown core? I mean, crime is down, but we hear frequently from, and it was in the paper, that people are concerned about walking down the street and trying to get through a crowd of people who are simply hanging around. It's not simply at the Right House. It happens in a number of areas. So what exactly does the action team do to move people along and prevent the crime from happening?
Councillor Farr, can you answer that, or should...
Actually difficult for me to answer, because this is where we've requested as a task force not only welcoming delegations from all sides of the issue, but also an expert, as it were, in the human rights. Obviously, a right to gather, a right to free speech, all of those rights on sidewalks or parks or elsewhere, anywhere in our city. It's important to be sure we define people's rights first and foremost.
They don't have a right to commit a crime.
But on the criminal side, I think
Through the
we
chair,
all
please,
agreed,
folks.
through you, Chair,
Through the chair.
we all agreed when Irene Hubar, as a delegate, along with a delegate who was quite articulate in her security guard that they had to hire for the area, Randy, at $30K annually, clearly articulated the issue, and she reconfirmed this morning with the back and forth we've had where others were CC'd, that the issue is the criminal behavior, of which, of course, we have laws and bylaws already in place to enforce. It's the public urination, suspected, alleged drug use, drug deals, and other activities that there was 3 assaults were mentioned, 1 was reported. It's those kinds of issues that we're pinpointing when staff from HBS and from municipal law enforcement get back to us. And we use the Barrie example. They created a bylaw. We would be enforcing existing laws and bylaws, but we use that as an example as that the big part of their change in their core as they address these issues had to do with the correct distribution of the right and appropriate staff.
Councillors, I'm wondering, it would be the police that could probably provide a more fulsome answer.
I was just going to ask the question with regards to, has the task force appeared before the Police Services Board, because they're the ones that make all these decisions?
We always have a member, although the last meeting, for some reason, we did not have a member from Hamilton Police Services Board, but they were well apprised immediately following the meeting. But they're almost always in attendance, so there'll be a representative, and it's generally Inspector Scott Raston. So he's the one from Hamilton Police Services charged with working with MLE on this report that will be coming to us Monday.
But I think the question was, have they actually presented to the Police Services Board?
Like, nothing's changed.
Yeah.
So then who's making the call then, Madam Chair? I mean, I've read this for 6 months. I emailed the mayor about it, and he said it's a resource issue. Well, that's the police chief's job, is to deal with the resources and put the police services where there's the need. So he's got 40 tasks or 40 action troops. Why aren't they being appropriately sent there?
So if I may suggest, perhaps, Councillor Farr, if I may suggest, perhaps this could be raised at the task force, that there be a delegation to the Police Services Board, and that there be that dual line of action taken between the city and the Police Services Board.
I
Councillor?
think the chair is correct. I think you should be appearing there with the task force and with the business leaders who are concerned about it before the Police Services Board and make sure they know what's going on.
I'm more than happy to do that.
We, as we're frequently told, we can't tell the police what to do. But the business leaders and the task force can appear before the Police Services Board and raise the concern there and let the board deal with it.
Okay, councillors, does that sound like a reasonable approach?
I look forward to Monday's meeting. I look forward to the representatives from Hamilton Police Services and our representatives from Municipal Law Enforcement reporting back accordingly on this unanimously approved motion from our last task force. But in addition to that, on Monday, I will raise that very good suggestion. Thank you.
Yes, to make a delegation. Okay, thank you, Councillor Clark.
Okay, so we're back to the motion that's before us.
You're taking the chair back, sir?
Yep, thank you. I'll take the chair back. Councillor Whitehead on the motion that's before us, please.
I just want to give a heads up. The chair of the board is just walking in. I believe we have a board meeting coming up in a week, actually, and I think there's a week period for delegation. You might be able to squeeze, if you talk nicely to the chair, a delegation status to the next board meeting. So I'm just going to highlight that.
Okay, so he has moved, Councillor Farr has moved item 1, seconded by Councillor Collins, and again, this is a report back, so no financial decisions are being made today, everyone. Thank you. All those in favor? Thank you. Oh, sorry, anyone opposed? Nobody. 8.9. This is the Hamilton Future Fund Board of Governors. Any questions with respect to item 1 that is before us? Moved by Councillor Jackson, seconded by Councillor Partridge. All those in favor? Thank you. Item 8.10, Advisory Committee for Persons with Disabilities. Councillor Whitehead. You're fine, thank you. You'll move to approve it, item 1? Okay, was there a question? Councillor Jackson?
So, Mr. Deputy Mayor, only because the Advisory Committee for Persons with Disabilities on page 3 of the report, they had a Faye Booker come in respecting the contextual perspective and the overall review of the DARTS operation. And so because our Advisory Committee of Citizens have raised it, I understand that there is some report coming back now that we've been through an HSR situation. My understanding is there is some report coming back either with audit and or recommendations and a hopeful presentation by DART's chair and the general manager to this body, Mr. Deputy Mayor, either to you, through you to city staff for just an assurance of that, since the Citizens Committee has raised it as well.
Mr. Hazel, this is the parking permit issue?
No,
you're dealing with
no,
on
this is
page
just
3?
generally about DARTs in general.
Oh, in DARTs in general?
In general, yes. On page 3, under information, Roman numeral 3, they've had a Faye Booker come in to speak to the committee about the overall operation of DARTs, and I just want to piggyback on that this body, the GIC and council, are getting a report back.
We should be getting a report back, but you may want to invite the DARTS board here so that they can answer questions. Councillor Jackson, which I think
in an
you
email
raised
to all
that
my
another time.
colleagues, I suggested that.
You suggested that, yes.
Yes, and I would hope that would be part and parcel of that, Mr. Deputy Mayor. As long as I'm getting nods today, I'm satisfied with that, but I just need assurances from staff, please. Through you.
Sure.
Mr. Murray?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, yes, it'll be coming back, and I made a note of inviting the DARTS board. So absolutely, in terms of the exact timing, I can't answer that, but I know we'll be coming back.
Thank you. Councillor Jackson?
Mr. Deputy Mayor, Chris, again, given the fact that we're all going to be in serious election mode, the ones that are running for re-election, in the next couple of months, seriously, around Labor Day thereafter, Chris, will that report be coming back hopefully timely in the next couple of months through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor?
Through Deputy Mayor, I will speak with Ann right after this meeting, and I'll have an update provided to all members of council as to when the time of arrival of that report is going to be.
Thanks so much, City Manager. Thanks, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Whitehead?
Just on that, my understanding, we did at Public Works put off a component that was dealing with DARTs so that we can deal with this all in a comprehensive manner, tied in with the report coming from the auditors, as well as there was a request made by DARTs and I guess Faye Booker to make a presentation to committee and council. So I think all that lumped together would be help us make informed decisions moving forward. And that is my understanding. The target date was August.
So your motion to have darts come forward, it sounds like that's going to happen, and Councillor Whitehead supports that. So as long as everyone knows it's happening, that's good. And Mr. Murray, you can follow up on it. So we still need a motion on item 1 and 8.10. Moved by Councillor Jackson, seconded by Councillor Whitehead. Any questions or comments on the item? All those in favor? Any opposed? Item's carried. 8.11, Hamilton Farmers Market. I'm getting tinkling everywhere here. Okay, who tinkled first? Put your hands up when you're tinkling. Councillor Farr and Councillor Duval, please.
I want to thank both Councillor Collins and Councillor Pasuta, who sit on the Hamilton Farmers Market Subcommittee with myself as chair, and just very briefly thank all of the staff led by John Hertel. We've come a long way in a relatively short time with a goal towards a new governance model and working in conjunction, of course, with the stall holders appropriately and other community members, and ultimately through the next term of council and through our selection committee, we'll be able to formulate that new board. That's item 1. And number 2, the Hamilton Farmers Market Pilot Parking Project Extension. Note in B that the money is identified from the stallholder fees, and so this is not from our City of Hamilton budget. And the reason for an extension of this pilot parking project is plain and simple, Mr. Chairman. It has been most successful, particularly on Saturdays, offering validation. I don't like saying free parking, validated parking for 1 hour. If you're shopping at the market, the York Parkade is the place to be. And if you buy an item, your ticket will be stamped accordingly as long as you're within the confines of that hour. So it's been quite good, and it's getting better, and all parties concerned see an extension as a prudent step forward for the remainder of this year. The original pilot, of course, was only half a year. Thank you for the time, and thank you to all staff led by John and my colleagues, Councillor Pasuta and Councillor Collins.
Councillor Duval, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and I think some of my questions have been answered, but on B, do I take it the stallholder fees and the actual rent payments are two different categories, two different pots of money, where one goes to the city for the rental and there's a stallholders fees that they divvy amongst themselves for projects? How do I get that?
Councillor Collins, please. One and the same, Councillor.
So, being said that, then we're taking money for parking out of priorities that the committee's already agreed to? Will that affect the city?
Councillor Collins, if you can help, please.
No, it's essentially they will be paying for their own parking program through their revenues that they generate. Monies that they contribute to the city will be allocated towards paying for the parking program. Okay. And it sounds like, according to Mr. Hertel, there's sufficient funds to pay for it without any additional monies being requested through the city's budget process.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Farr.
As an example, in the first 6 months, we utilized the stallholders' marketing budget. And rather than paying for radio time or an ad in the paper, we used it to offset the costs at the parkade. So similar.
Thank you. So I need items 1 and 2 to be approved. Can I get a motion for both? Moved by Farr, seconded by Collins. All those in favor? Carried. Any opposed? The item's carried. Item 8.12, Hamilton Future Fund Board of Governors. Councillor Ferguson will move them all, seconded by Councillor Pearson. Any comments or questions? All those in favor? Carried. Item is carried. Item 8.13, Open for Business Subcommittee. Councillor Powers? Move. Councillor Pearson, seconded. Councillor Johnson, question?
Yeah, thank you. And this is really a generic question for the Open for Business Subcommittee. And I'm just wondering if this is on the docket, and if we can, if they need any help getting it on the docket, I'd be happy to help. This is basically from the former municipality hangovers, if you will. I have a resident who lived in the Hamilton Mountain, had a home business. hairdressing, moved into the former municipality across the road, and now she cannot open up her business because parking is an issue, because of we're hanging on to the former municipality's guidelines. Double car garage, the whole bit, it's one chair, one car. We're not even allowing her to stack cars. And yet across the road in the former city of Hamilton, she didn't have an issue with us. So I'm coming up with some of these scenarios quite often because people are starting to move out into the Glanbrook area, thankfully. But there's also some issues associated with that. So just a generic question out there to the Open for Business committee members, if there's something that's on the docket to address this, so we can expedite some of these home businesses that are flourishing across the road, but have been stalled now and almost in abeyance.
Councillor Powers, as chair of the committee, I'd like to ask you.
Exactly the same issues being raised by Councillor Johnson were raised at our meeting. If in the information section, it indicates particularly examples are the ones like parking, so it is being dealt with, and it's on the docket for the ongoing Open for Business. If indeed it's the pleasure of the new council to continue the committee, then they'll come back. Other ones are ones that clearly come under the purview of the planning committee, and those meetings have taken place. And certainly, most recently, I had a meeting with Mr. Robichaud and Ms. Hickey Evans about parking situations, and those items may very well find their way to the planning committee vis-a-vis the Open for Business. So this will continue to be the venue for issues like that, if indeed it's the pleasure of the new council to continue the committee.
Deputy Mayor, thank you for allowing Councillor Powers for that answer. It's just a very frustrating process right now. I've got Marty and the gang, and they're doing their job, and they're actually sending out letters for cease and desist, and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing under the bylaw. And yet we've got a business owner that wants to just move her place to a bigger place. In fact, if anything, she's got one chair, no staff, and it's just frustrating to say to her, I'm sorry, you moved to Glanbrook. So thank you very much for the answer, and I'm looking forward to working with the committee to get this done and resolved quickly. And thank you for your time.
Thank you. Councillor Whitehead, please.
Thank you. That issue actually isn't an Open for Business issue. That's really a part of the comprehensive zoning bylaw review. What has transpired here is that it was the communities of Binbrook that had imposed those kinds of planning restrictions, that in those independent areas, the comprehensive, since we passed the urban and rural official plan, the staff are now embarking on the comprehensive planning review, which will capture and harmonize those areas on the desire of this council. So I understand you want to go to the open business, but the real pressure needs to be applied on this issue to on the comprehensive zoning review.
But I am under the understanding that the Open for Business Committee makes comments and recommendations on that. Yes? Yeah. Okay, so it's still at that committee. Councillor McCaddy, then back to Councillor Powers.
Mr. Chair, my comment wasn't actually just a general comment on the committee. I've been watching this committee carefully this term of council. This is such an important issue for us, Open for Business, and issues of red tape, and people come to Hamilton, they want to open a new business, and there's a lot of difficulties, and those difficulties can continue, and I hear about them as I'm sure everybody does in the community. But I just want to recognize, and I think we should celebrate the distance we've come during this term with this committee meeting, and the work of Chris Phillips and others at the staff level, but particularly recognizing the leadership of Councillor Powers. And I don't know if this is the last set of minutes we'll have before us before the end of council, and one more, so
we're still got him at
save all my real kudos for that. But just congratulations to Councillor Powers for moving this ahead, and this is a detail-oriented type of committee, and his leadership is obvious. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor McCaddy. Councillor Powers?
Just to assist Councillor Whitehead and the other ones, is very clearly he's indeed correct, as there's a review undergoing with regards to the zoning bylaw that will impact all municipalities. But the issue is if there's a way, but that's kind of on the docket to be dealt with a couple of years out. So what we've identified is where there are challenges holding back the problems that Councillor Johnson has identified, ones that I have in my community where, you know, we have built structure going back 200 years and that, and there's no place to put parking because it's built corner to corner to corner. If there's a way we can get ahead of those and yet they'll be incorporated in the new zoning bylaw when it comes together, we're planning to do that.
I'm sure Mr. Thorne, who's very creative, will be able to assist us in that regard, so I look forward to it. On 8.13, we have items 1 through 4. We can move them all at once. Moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Ferguson. All those in favor? Thank you. So motions, Councillor Ferguson, you have a motion, additional funding for the renovation and construction of dressing rooms, Spring Valley Arena, Ancaster. Do you wish to speak to your motion now?
Yeah, I'd like to move it. It's seconded by Councillor Farr. If I can, I'll speak to it very briefly.
Please.
First of all, I'd like to thank Councillor Farr for supporting this. You may recall during the budget process, he was the one lone vote opposed to this. And so he received some criticism for that and took the time to drive up and see it, and now he was anxious to second it after seeing the condition of that facility. So thank you very much for that. But staff came to me and asked me to bring this on. It was going to be tricky to get it done before the council wrapped up. I was surprised by the amount. The detailed design is now complete, and they're plugging in $350 a square foot, which sounds high for a square box, but that's the staff's suggestion. And so it's before you today. It is 100% funded by DCs because it is growth, so it doesn't affect other capital projects. And the one other account, the be reappropriated was the HVAC system, which will be fixed. The HVAC system for Spring Valley, which will now be fixed as part of the new dressing room. So Rome D'Angelo is here to answer any other technical questions that somebody may have. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. Councillor Whitehead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I certainly support the use of the development charges. I've asked, and I've been on the phone with Rome and with Joe Speiler, and it harkens me back to a time when we were on the books, the multi-use facility on the mountain, and I made the arguments that not only are we going to have a year-round facility, but we can put added programming in there to meet the ever growth on the mountain. And at that time, Joe Rinaldo said, definitely not. You cannot use development charges for that purpose unless you're building another ice rink that's meeting the growth, but you're not expanding or changing anything in regards to capacity. I thought that was a weak argument. So certainly the argument to creatively use development charges is brilliant. We should be doing this years ago, quite frankly. So I support that. I congratulate Councillor Ferguson. I just hope that there's going to be some continuity in the approach by staff when it comes to those kinds of issues, because 100% of area rating money needed to be used in multi-use when I fought for those same development charges on the West Mountain, and I was told it couldn't be done. So I would hope that we get the act straightened out and that there's continuity in play when we're dealing with councillors on these issues, that if there are some flexibility that is being applied across the board and not burdening one area over another. So I love the idea that it's now enshrined. It's by passing this motion, it's now going to enable many of our communities like Stony Creek that need expansion in their dressing rooms, and I think they lost the Warriors to Ancaster because they couldn't get their dressing rooms expanded and didn't have the money. So now that we know we can tap into development charge for the expansion of dressing rooms, I think that's great. Thank you.
Mr. Speiler is creative, but we had an excellent DC sub-review committee that worked through that process, so well done all around. Councillor Powers.
Mr. McKinnon and I do not have a conflict of interest here. His son has moved on from playing at the Spring Valley Arena, but my grandsons are still playing in it, so I don't have but they'll certainly benefit from the washrooms thing.
Still don't think that's a conflict of interest. Councillor Duvall.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I guess through you, maybe going to ask staff. I thought we did something about this last year on the renovations of the dressing rooms. So I guess my question is, if I remember correctly, it was around $200,000 or $300,000. Why is an additional $750,000 needed? No report, there's no nothing.
Mr. D'Angelo, I think.
Yeah, through the chair to the councillor. The $400,000 was to address the current status of the change rooms and the life cycle renewal of equipment in that area. But because of the supply and demand and the utilization of hockey in Ancaster, there was, I guess, a request that we expand the change rooms to accommodate 4 change rooms.
Well, on something like this, through you, Mr. Chair, do you think a report should not come through so we can have a good understanding of what's actually happening? I understand in this motion it says from development charges. Geez, I have a whole bunch of roads and sidewalks, but I was told we don't have the development money there. The charges were being used somewhere else, and now I understand we can use it for expanding the change rooms. I mean, there's a priority base in here, and all of a sudden, I just think that we're jumping the queue here without proper information.
So, Mr. D'Angelo, if you could address the issue of there's no report, and then I'll have Mr. Speiler address the issue of the DCs.
Through the chair to the councillor, we're trying to expedite this this project because of the timing of the capital deliberation, and as well as we can start working on the expansion without affecting the 2014-2015 season. We'll be working on the one end of the arena. We've already engaged an architect, and we can be into a tender situation by late summer, early fall.
Paul?
Thanks. Thank you. I can't believe what I'm just hearing here. Like, everything is moving forward, and let's go get the money later. I want to know what other priorities in there, who else has been on the waiting list, who's going to be jumping the queue now, if anybody is going to be jumping the queue. I understand this work has to be done, but many other arenas have to be done also. And it's just like out of the blue, I don't know what happened and the reason why these have to be expanded to close to another $750,000. But I would like to have that in detail. Because as of now, I certainly can't support it the way it's written. Thank you.
Mr. Speiler, if you could come forward. Mr. Zagaric, it doesn't matter, whichever one wants to handle the DC question.
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, with respect to the appropriateness of the $675,000 from development charge reserve account 110320, this project was part of the development charge background study. So again, that is a requirement that the project form part of the development charge background study, which this project did. With respect to that reserve, that's our DC indoor rec reserve. And again, that reserve can only be used for indoor recreation projects. So again, in terms of the utilization for that reserve, this project is appropriate, and those that reserve funding cannot be applied to roads, for instance. The collection of those DCs that accrue to that reserve must be used for indoor rec.
Councillor Duval?
Thank you, and thanks, Mike, for that answer. So I'm glad I'm being told that it can't be used for roads, it's got to be used for recreation. So was there a list of projects that have been on the capital books throughout the city for other recreational facilities, and is this one jumping any type of a queue?
Through the chair to the councillor, we do have a program for arenas that we submit in our capital budget every year. We create a balance of works right across all our facilities, the arena stock. It's estimated that we put in about $1 million a year towards arenas. This particular project does not affect the block funding because it does come from DCs and it's part of the chargeback background study. So it doesn't impact those other facilities, or it hasn't jumped the queue like I'm hearing that some of the councillors think it has. Our block funding deals with life cycle renewal, and we do treat each of the facilities across the board equally.
Councillor.
Thank you, and thanks, Mr. Chair. So I want to make it clear, I'm not against Ancaster having better change rooms, okay, and expanding. I'm not against that at all. All I'm wondering is, all of a sudden we have $1 million in block funding, and we all have to wait in line in those certain areas for our recreation centers, and yet we find another pot of money that we can say, it didn't fit into the block funding, but we can get it from here. So other projects could have maybe been fitted into here also that's been waiting in line. And I guess that's why I'm having problems. So I'd rather have a better understanding. I think a report should be coming through for $750,000 of to find out why this is so important, and what other projects were being affected from it, or could have been also being done at the same time. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Powers. If you could take the chair, and then after myself, Councillor Whitehead is up again. Mr. D'Angelo, through you, Mr. Chairman, was there a report originally on this project? This is, from what I'm hearing, subsequent to the original approval, because the cost went up. So there had to have been a report the first time round.
Through the chair, there wasn't a report. It was a motion that was brought forward.
So there was no report on the arena at all?
Through the chair, no, there wasn't.
With regards to the DC charge, how did it get, I know we did a thorough job on the DCs, but if it wasn't, there was no report for it, how did it get in our background study that we had to include the work on it?
So through the chair, it was it represented one of a number of projects that were added to our recent background study. And so again, it's added by staff in terms of projects. And so in the background study, there is a total of 22 projects that comprise our list of indoor recreation facility projects for the period 2014, and it extends all the way out to 2023. This specific project was identified with a timing of 2014 to 2016.
Okay, so to be clear, Mr. Chairman, it was actually identified specifically by this arena, not just 22 arenas. This is, we have to list every one of them, correct?
So through the chair, yes, the councillor is correct. This specific project, and it's titled Spring Valley Arena Change Room Expansion, had a estimated capital cost of $700,000, and the timing was 2014 to 16. And as Councillor Clark has identified, it represents one of a total of 22 projects that comprise our list of indoor recreation facilities as part of our recent DC background study.
And Mr. Chairman, have we already spent money on the project? Or is this 675 the total cost of the project now? Well, 700,000 really.
Through the chair.
Mr. D'Angelo, please.
Thank you. Through the chair, we've retained an architect as part of the original design. We haven't expanded to the addition part of the project.
Okay, so we've spent on the initial design for it, but we have not added the additional work with the change rooms, is what I'm hearing.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay. And I'm just curious, I do have a problem with there's no report. I thought there was a report that we'd already dealt with on it. So there's been no report on the actual scope or what's being undertaken and what the costs were at all.
Through the chair, that's correct. And if council chooses, I mean, we have another council meeting in August, we could have a report at that meeting.
And is that going to affect your timelines?
Through the chair, no.
I'm in the same boat, so I'm a little bit surprised that we don't have a report.
Can I just jump in here, if you don't mind, please? Perhaps either Mr. Zagaric or Mr. D'Angelo, when we get our capital books, it lists the projects, and if they're listed there, there's usually a substantiation page that justifies the recommendations for the expenditure of money. Was there or was there not one of those? Or were these add-ons, Mr. Zagaric, that there was not substantiating information?
Through the chair, a detail sheet was added to the final approved 2014 capital budget, but as Mr. D'Angelo's identified, the original capital project of $463,000 was put forward in a motion as well. But there is a capital detail sheet that was included in the final approved capital budget that provides some description of the objectives of the original $463,000 project.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for interrupting, Councillor.
No, it's helpful because, just from a process point of view, it's challenging to understand that we're spending this amount of money, but we haven't had a report to verify what we're spending. Even though it was in the capital budget, there should have been a one-pager or something to identify exactly what the scope was and where the money was going. Otherwise, it's really a challenge to hold anyone to account on the overall file. But the DCs, if it was in the background study and they assured us of that, then there's the funds have been put in there specifically for it, and our staff are correct. We can't use that DC money for any other charge. The Development Charges Act is really prescriptive. It's probably one of the most prescriptive acts that we have. And if we collect funds for a project and we don't proceed with the project, the funds can't be utilized for any other project. It's that narrow a scope. So if we said that we've got 22 rec centers and here's what the DCs will be collected on, and then we proceed without one of them, then it's 21 now. We don't collect the money and then spend it on roads, sidewalks, or sewers. We have to spend it exactly what we put in that study. And if you'll recall, we all received this large package, and I recall saying, this is 25 years of capital planning now in here. This is what we're doing. That document lists every single project that we can legally charge a DC on. So the one in Councillor Ferguson's ward was in that background study, and that's how we can actually charge the DC as opposed to going to the levy. So there's no impact to the levy, but I am disappointed that we don't have a formal report. So with that, I'll take the chair back. I have Councillor Whitehead.
Sorry, I have Councillor Whitehead and I have Councillor Jackson. I don't know whether Councillor Jackson is first time respecting.
Councillor Jackson is first time. I will go to him.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Deputy Mayor. So right off the bat, I'm supportive. Remember when Councillor Ferguson brought this forward months ago, he described for me the dilapidated conditioning of the condition of the dressing rooms and somewhat embarrassing in health and safety and all that. And he mentioned to me recently about this budget overrun, unfortunately, and I said, you know what, if the work has to get done, it has to get done. Where, Mr. Deputy Mayor, we run into trouble with each other from time to time, if you recall a month ago, we were all up in arms when Councillor Whitehead brought forward a $1.6 million budget overrun to have stormwater management properly done in his Fessenden neighborhood. And I was part of it, and we all said, hold it. We need at least some kind of a report from staff just indicating why the budget overrun has occurred. So for consistency's sake, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Deputy Mayor, moving forward, I would impart that bit of wisdom upon all my colleagues that we do our very best to provide some consistency across the board, because Councillor Whitehead, talk about deficiencies and urgencies, stormwater management, where neighbors had repeated experiences of flooding, I would humbly suggest is incredibly a high priority. And we did get a report within a week, and then the following week at council finally approved it. So, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I leave that with you and staff and all my colleagues to keep that in mind moving forward. Thanks, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, and there's nothing stopping this committee asking our staff to do the same thing, a one-page report indicating why the cost has gone up, and we get it at council and we can ratify accordingly at council. So that's still within our purview. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Councillor, and I'm not one of those that what comes around goes around. I think the right thing is what we should always do, and I know that Councillor Ferguson actually led the charge in asking for more information on that Fessenden flood issue. I remember him specifically making that request for additional information report. Even though there was an original report done, this was the differential in the report. We haven't received a report on this one or a report on the differential. So we don't even have, we're starting from a lesser position on this one than we did with the Fessenden. Having said that, I also understand the need. And I understand there are circumstances that come periodically that you need to address because of timing, especially with now with our summer schedule. So when you take all those things in consideration, then from my perspective, is it the right thing? And from my perspective, it is. The question I have for staff, though, is on that background study, see, this is the stuff that happens behind closed doors and unfortunately doesn't get shared with the rest of the council.
No. To be fair, the DC charge review, it wasn't behind closed doors.
Okay.
It was a complete public process.
No, that's not what I'm asking.
Behind closed doors implies that, Councillor.
No, what I'm asking is what 22 projects, I don't have anything in my docket or in my office that says here's the 22 projects that were listed in the ground study, and here's the priorities set forth by CMT through that. You show me where it is, because I don't have it.
I'll take you to your office. It's this thick. It's called the development review.
So can I ask what those projects are?
Why don't you read the document? Mr. Zagaric, were they provided the information in that document?
Yeah, through the chair.
Could you hold the document up so the council can see what it is when he looks in his office?
All of council receives our development charge background study when the development charges are brought before council for your consideration. So again, you will each have a development charge background study. This study, as Councillor Clark has identified, breaks down the projects extending out to the Quantum 2031. So for each of the specific program areas, it identifies the projects, the timing, the cost, and the proportion of the cost that will be collected from development charges. So again,
it's in that report, Terry.
And in terms of the list of 22 projects, it is on page 5-16 of the DC study.
Thank you. Councillor Whitehead.
So the question again is does that identify 1 through 22 what the priorities are? Or is it a list of background study projects that were concluded? Is there a supplement list that staff have produced that clearly identify where the priorities are in pursuing those development charges?
So through the chair, what the list does provide, again, are the projects and the timing of the projects. It does not prioritize the projects, but it provides a timing for the projects. And as I mentioned previously, the timing ranges from 2014 all the way out to 2023.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I'm in the committee's hands, and to be clear, Councillor Ferguson did not oppose any report coming forward. This is just the motion here. Councillor Ferguson?
Yeah, let me just, I actually suggested to staff that maybe we should bring a report forward. They said because of the summer schedule, there's only one meeting in July, one meeting in August, and one meeting in September. The chances of us getting on the agenda are pretty slim. And, you know, they're in disgusting shape, these things. So they said, why don't you just walk a motion on? So I said, okay, I'll do that. It wasn't the DC report, so finance staff supported it. Certainly, Rome can explain to you the need about the utilization of the Firestone and the Spring Valley Arena. And so I was actually a touch uncomfortable, but it's the right thing to do, as Councillor Whitehead said. Mm-hmm. And if we weren't bumping into this election deadline, I probably would have insisted on a report. But, you know, and in the case of the stormwater management plan, the only reason I waited 1 week, I think it was, the next Public Works meeting, because Gary Moore said, we switched from native backfill to granular backfill. How much did that add? Could you just give us a report back on that? Because if it could save the $1 million, you know, it's worth waiting a week. And he actually, I talked to him earlier. I don't see Gary here now, but they saved in the order of $200,000 by doing that one change. It was identified and asked for a further report on that. I don't see that here. I think $350 a square foot, quite frankly, though, is high. But when the tender goes in, we don't use the money. It'll be returned anyway. And so because of it's just time sensitive, because of the pressure of the election coming up, getting it on an agenda, we're going to have a busy August and September trying to get a lot of things through. I agree to walk this on as a motion. I'd like to let my motion stand today if I could, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor McCaddy and then Councillor Duvall.
So, Mr. Chair, can we not request just a little email project update? I think you suggested a couple of moments ago between now and council, which is, I guess, Friday. And obviously staff had the information. To go through the report process is a long, difficult thing. We don't have time for that. But just a quick update by email, I think will give us the comfort we need. Make the decision today. We can read it between now and Friday, and we can move ahead.
Mr. D'Angelo, a one-pager, is that possible?
Through the chair, yes, that is possible.
And I think we should receive it at council also, though, so if we could just make sure that it's circulated to the clerks. Thank you, Councillor McCaddy. Councillor Duval?
I think that answers what I was going to ask, and if that can be done by Friday, I think that'd be great. Some kind of justification, what is the need for, why is another $750? Just give me some kind of comfort to tell my residents to say, all I know is we spent it on a washroom. I don't know what the reasons were for. So I think that would be great if we had, even on one page, some kind of definition of why we're spending this kind of money.
Okay, I think we're all on the same page. You had moved it, Councillor Ferguson. I don't recall who seconded it, though. Councillor Farrar, that's correct, with great fanfare. All those in favor? Carried. And you'll note the direction. Thank you. You'll note the direction with regards to the one page for council, and Councillor Duval wishes to be indicated as opposed at GIC. Thank you. We are now moving to Councillor Duval, a motion on the National Slow Pitch Athletics Enterprises of Canada field rental rates, and I believe that copy was provided today, so it should be everyone should have it in front of them. Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And you have the motion in front of you. It's National Slow Pitch of Canada is an organization that 5 years ago has decided to put all their games here at Turner Park. And it started off small and has expanded in the last couple of years to now they have the provincials. We have an economic impact to the city that generates about $1.2 million annually, and it's getting bigger. And so they've asked, we had a meeting with our staff and the organization, and they've asked for some type of break on the reduction on the cost for the actual fields. And the reason why is that this is a pretty well-organized group where they need fencing, and we don't have all that proper fencing to give them in the park. So they pay approximately $7,000 per tournament to provide that fencing up for us and take it down. So they're asking for a little bit of a break. And then going into, also this motion will direct our staff for going back into another 5-year agreement where we can work together with the league and making sure that some of that funding will go into making permanent fencing to keep down the cost for everybody. But it's a great organization, and I certainly support it, and trying to help them out with some of their costs they're doing.
Councillor Jackson? I was just going to say, Councillor Jackson seconding it. Thank you. Any comments or questions on the item? All those in favor? Carried. Any opposed? The item is carried. Thank you. We are now moving into notices of motions. Does anyone have a notice of motion? I'm seeing nothing. Members of the committee, please, we need a motion to approve the revised due dates. Can I please get a revised date for staff for them moved by Councillor Marula, seconded by Councillor McCaddy. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Also need a motion with regards to revised due dates on outstanding business. Item Q, coordination of roadworks and utilities, July 7th. Item HH, municipal liability, April 2nd. Opera Hamilton, correspondence from Theatre Aquarius, June 18th. Correspondence from the Grand River Conservation Authority, July 7th. Hamilton Municipal Parking lease, which is July 7th. So I guess that's the one to be removed, right? Madam Clerk?
The final one, the Hamilton Municipal Parking, will not be removed until after discussion.
Okay, so we'll leave E out until we come out of the camera. So 11.2 A through D. Moved by Pinkett, seconded by Jackson. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Members of the committee may have a motion to move into closed session pursuant to subsections 8.1 B, C, D, E, and F of the city's procedural bylaw and section 239.2 of the Municipal Act 2001 as amended, as the subject matter pertains to the following. 12.1, a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land for municipal or local board purposes respecting land acquisition, 85 Mary Street. 12.2, a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land for municipal or local board purposes respecting the Hamilton Municipal Parking System, renewal of a parking lease, car park number 80, 191 King Street, and 22 to 30 Bay Street South. 12.3 is litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality or local board respecting a HECFI contract. 12.4 is labor relations and employee negotiations respecting public works and arbitration update. 12.5 is a proposed or pending acquisition of disposition of land for municipal or local board purposes respecting parkland acquisition, 63 Cannon Street, adjacent to the McLaren Park. 12.6 is a litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality or local board and for the receiving of advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for the purpose respecting contaminated property and the related potential litigation. Moved by Councillor Powers, second by Councillor Ferguson. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we're now going in camera.